They thought their numbers made them untouchable. They gathered in secret, whispered in corners, and told themselves that together they could crush you. It looked clever at first: strength in unity, power in shadows, comfort in conspiracies. But what they failed to understand is that alliances built on weakness do not endure. Their bond was not forged in truth, but in fear. And when fear binds people, it only lasts until someone stronger walks into the room. That was you. You weren't loud, you weren't reckless. You were steady. And steady has always been more terrifying than noise. They had no idea how to handle someone who didn't flinch. When shady alliances are built, their glue is gossip, resentment, and shared envy. Those things create temporary trust, but trust made of venom always poisons itself. The moment pressure arrives, cracks spread like glass under strain. They begin blaming each other, wondering who will break first. That's the power of your presence. You didn't even have to strike hard. All you had to do was exist with a level of strength they could not mimic. Your steadiness exposed their fragility. Their whispers turned to panic because they realized they never actually had loyalty, only mutual convenience. Psychology proves this every time. Groups formed on negativity collapse faster than groups formed on principle. They may look united when their target is you, but their unity ends the second they feel danger. Because deep down, they don't trust one another either. Each one secretly hopes to be the survivor if everything falls apart. That's why shady alliances are always doomed. They bond over destruction, never construction. They bond over who they hate, not what they build. And when hate runs out of room to grow, they turn inward and eat each other alive. Your force didn't just break them. It exposed what was already rotting inside. You need to remember how threatening composure can be. They expected you to react, to lash out, to play the game on their level. If you had, they might have lasted longer. But your calm unnerved them. You refused to get tangled in their schemes, and that refusal showed everyone watching how weak they really were. Your silence became louder than their gossip. Your focus became sharper than their distraction. While they wasted hours scheming, you were building. And nothing terrifies manipulators more than realizing their games didn't stop your growth. That's when their alliance begins to crumble, because their effort feels wasted. People who band together in shadows often overestimate their influence. They believe that because they have a crowd, they have strength. But a crowd without direction is chaos disguised as power. When they faced you, they encountered direction. You weren't moving blindly. You had clarity, patience, conviction. Those three qualities dismantle any group built on deceit. One by one, their members realize they tied themselves to something unstable. And when survival instincts kick in, loyalty dies quickly. You don't have to break them individually. They unravel themselves when they realize staying together is more dangerous than standing alone. Think of how they must feel now. Each glance across their alliance is no longer a look of solidarity, but suspicion. Each word spoken carries the question: who will betray first? You created that tension without lifting a blade. By refusing to bend, you forced them to face their own lack of spine. And the truth is, people who lack spine cannot stand pressure for long. They either collapse or flee. You didn't need to fight them directly. You just had to stand unshaken. The cracks were already there. You only widened them by existing in a way they could not imitate. It's important you see how their collapse benefits you. Their alliance once looked intimidating, but now it looks pathetic. People who once believed their lies now watch their disintegration and begin questioning everything they ever said. Exposure doesn't need your hands. It only needs time. Their desperation to destroy you became their downfall. They underestimated how quickly fear spreads in groups without loyalty. Once one person doubts, the doubt spreads like infection. Soon, everyone is scrambling to protect themselves, abandoning the unity they once pretended was unbreakable. That's how fragile false power truly is. The lesson is simple but sharp. Never envy the size of a group. Size means nothing when the foundation is rotten. A single individual with integrity, vision, and patience is stronger than a dozen voices united by deceit. They never faced a force like you because they never faced someone who refused to play on their terms. You didn't fight for their acceptance. You didn't shrink under their pressure. You moved as if their alliance was already meaningless. And in doing so, you made it meaningless. They realize too late that the weight of truth is heavier than the illusion of numbers. People will always try to form alliances against those they fear. It's easier to attack in packs than stand as one. But packs built on shadows always collapse in light. You are that light. You don't need to convince them of your power. They feel it in the way their group falls apart when you refuse to bow. That's what sets you apart. You don't fight fire with fire. You let their fire consume itself until nothing remains but ash and regret. And in those ashes, you stand as proof that one force rooted in truth will always outlast 100 rooted in lies. They walk through life desperate for approval. Every smile they offer, every word they speak, every gesture they make is carefully constructed to avoid rejection. They are terrified of being hated. Hatred feels like death to them because it means being stripped of the comfort of belonging. They pray silently for acceptance, bending themselves into versions that are palatable, digestible, and non-threatening. They want to be liked at all costs. But what they never realize is that in this constant prayer not to be hated, they lose the very essence of who they are. Their identities rot under the weight of other people's comfort, leaving them hollow shells who confuse applause for purpose. You need to understand what this fear does to people. It weakens them before life even begins to test them. Someone who fears hatred can never stand alone. They will betray themselves just to remain in the group. They will abandon their values just to keep applause. And when push comes to shove, they will sell you out too. Because being hated by you is less terrifying to them than being hated by the crowd. This is why you must never envy those who are universally liked. They are not admired. They are tolerated. And tolerance is fragile. It disappears the second you stop serving someone's comfort. Psychology has long known that humans crave acceptance as much as food and shelter. But the danger is when acceptance becomes oxygen. They can't breathe without it. And so they live suffocating lives, begging silently not to be hated. But hate is inevitable. If you stand for anything, if you dare to live authentically, if you carry conviction, someone will hate you. The prayer to avoid hate is a prayer to avoid truth. And truth doesn't bend for approval. That's why people who fear hate are constantly exhausted. They fight battles against reality, against authenticity, against their own souls. When you step into a room, you don't beg for love, and that terrifies them. You are willing to be disliked if it means standing firm. That's why your presence unsettles them so deeply. You remind them of their fragility. They see in you what they could never be, free. Free from dependence on applause, free from the terror of rejection. And in their envy, they hate you all the more, even while they continue praying that no one hates them. That is the irony. They fear hate yet are consumed by it, while you allow hate to exist without being poisoned by it. That's the difference between strength and dependence. Watch how they move in crowds. They laugh louder than they mean to. They nod at words they don't agree with. They clap for people they secretly resent. All of this is prayer in disguise. They are pleading, silently begging not to be the target of rejection. Their fear makes them predictable, and predictability is weakness. You, however, thrive on unpredictability because you don't need the shield of approval. That makes you dangerous. While they move carefully to avoid hatred, you move boldly, even if it invites it. And in that boldness, you carve a path they could never follow. There is a cost to fearing hate. It makes people manipulatable. Liars, abusers, and opportunists prey on those who can't stand rejection. All it takes is the threat of disapproval, and they crumble. They obey, they comply. They hand over their dignity just to avoid being disliked. You've probably seen it in your own life. People defending the wrong just because they didn't want to lose their seat at the table. Their fear of hate enslaves them, while you, unafraid of it, remain untouchable. They pray not to be hated, and in doing so, they hand power over to anyone willing to exploit that weakness. Hate has its own strange power. It refines. When people hate you, you see clearly who your real allies are. You learn to stand taller without applause. You learn that solitude can be strength, not punishment. This is why you must never fear it. Hate clarifies, but they will never know this gift because their prayers shield them from discomfort. They think they're winning by being liked, when really they are losing everything that matters. Truth, identity, resilience. You, by enduring hate, become someone they cannot understand. Their shallow prayers keep them small, while your willingness to be despised makes you unforgettable. Think of how many leaders, creators, and visionaries were hated in their time. People spat on them, mocked them, exiled them. But in the end, the same world that hated them bowed to their legacy. Meanwhile, those who prayed to be liked faded into dust, remembered by no one. Hate, paradoxically, builds immortality, because it means you stood for something that shook people. Their prayers not to be hated ensure they will never shake anything. They'll live safe, quiet, agreeable lives, and disappear without leaving a single mark. That is the greatest tragedy of fearing hate. So when you feel hatred aimed at you, don't panic. See it as confirmation that you are alive, that you are standing on ground others fear to touch. Their prayers to avoid what you embrace prove the difference between you and them. They worship approval. You walk past it. They pray not to be hated. You accept hate as a companion, knowing it cannot touch the core of who you are. That is why you grow stronger with every sneer and whisper. Hate is not the end. It is the echo of impact. Acceptance is the invisible leash most people never notice wrapped around their throats. From childhood, they are conditioned to seek it. The approval of parents, the nod of teachers, the applause of peers. It feels safe, like warmth in a cold room. But that craving is also what keeps them chained. They shape, shift to fit expectations, abandon parts of themselves that don't win applause, and mistake survival in the crowd for strength. You, however, must recognize the danger in this. When humans crave acceptance too deeply, they stop living as individuals. They become echoes, repeating what others want to hear, terrified that standing alone will strip them of identity. And the cruel twist is that the acceptance they fight for is always temporary, always conditional. This craving explains why lies spread faster than truth, why manipulators rise, why weak alliances form. People would rather belong to something false than face the terror of isolation. They nod at words they don't believe, laugh at jokes they don't find funny, and agree to paths that hollow them out, just to remain in the circle. They call it compromise, but it is surrender. Their fear of rejection outweighs their hunger for authenticity. And when you break away, when you stand on your own, they call you arrogant. Not because you are wrong, but because your independence exposes their addiction. They crave acceptance so much that your refusal to beg for it feels like an attack. Psychology names this tendency social conformity. The brain is wired to avoid exclusion because to be cast out once meant death. Survival depended on tribes, but in modern life that wiring becomes a trap. People still act as if disapproval is fatal when in reality it is freedom. This is where you gain your edge. You refuse to live by ancient programming. While they tremble at the thought of being disliked, you welcome it. And that makes you unpredictable, uncontrollable. Their craving is your leverage. You can watch them bend, compromise, and betray themselves while you remain grounded in truth. They think you're reckless. In reality, you're liberated. Look at how this craving poisons relationships. Entire friendships are maintained out of fear of being alone. Families pressure individuals to conform, disguising control as love. Workplaces turn into theaters where people perform acceptance rather than pursue excellence. It is everywhere, and because so few resist it, acceptance becomes a currency. The one who withholds it holds power. Manipulators know this well. They dangle approval, withdraw it, then offer it again. Those addicted to belonging jump at every shift, enslaved by their craving. But you must never fall for this game. The moment you stop needing their acceptance, their currency becomes worthless. You strip them of control by refusing to play. You've likely seen how fragile people become when disapproval hits. They crumble under criticism, panic at gossip, or retreat the second someone questions them. Their identities are built on sand, and acceptance is the only thing keeping their walls upright. Remove that, and they collapse. But your strength comes from building on stone. You know that disapproval doesn't kill, it clarifies. It shows you who is real and who is not. Every person who walks away when you no longer bow to their standards is someone who was never truly with you. That revelation is painful, yes, but it is also liberation. Their exit clears space for loyalty that cannot be bought with performance. The craving for acceptance also fuels hypocrisy. Watch how quickly people shift their morals depending on who is watching. They condemn in one room, applaud in another, and remain blind to their contradictions. Why? Because being accepted in the moment matters more to them than integrity. They are mirrors, reflecting whatever face stands in front of them. But mirrors have no substance. They shatter the moment pressure hits. You, on the other hand, refuse to reflect. You radiate. That's why they resent you. They see in you the courage they lack. Your refusal to bend makes them uncomfortable, because it reveals how cheaply they've sold themselves to the crowd. This is why so many groups hate the lone wolf. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They hate you because you don't need them. You prove that survival without their approval is possible, even powerful. And that realization threatens the very structure of their lives. They cling to groups, even toxic ones, because the idea of walking alone terrifies them. But you walk with ease. You move without begging for permission. And in doing so, you remind them that their chains are self-imposed. They call you dangerous not because you are cruel, but because you expose the truth. They could break free too, if only they dared. Consider how different your life becomes when you stop craving acceptance. Decisions sharpen. Relationships clarify. Energy returns. You stop wasting time trying to please people who will never be satisfied, and instead build a life that satisfies you. That's what they don't understand. Acceptance is not stability. It is dependence. And dependence always comes with a cost. Every compromise you make for approval cuts off a piece of your soul. By the time they are done praying to be liked, they are empty. You refuse that path. You'd rather be full and feared than hollow and applauded. The truth is simple. Humans crave acceptance, but that craving is their cage. Most will never escape it. They will live and die begging for approval that was never unconditional. But you are different. You've tasted rejection and found it survivable. You've stood alone and found it powerful. And that changes everything. Once you stop craving what they cannot live without, you move beyond their reach. You stop dancing for the crowd and begin moving for yourself. That independence is terrifying to them because it proves freedom is possible. They studied the earlier versions of you as if those were permanent blueprints. They memorized your insecurities, your hesitations, your weaknesses, and thought they had the script to your entire life. But growth destroys scripts. The person you were is not the person you are now, and the gap between the two terrifies them. They are still fighting the ghost of who you used to be, still trying to trigger habits you've already burned away. You outgrew every version of yourself they had access to, and that means they are no longer equipped to deal with the force you've become. Their weapons are aimed at shadows that no longer exist. Think about how much control people believe they gain when they catalog your flaws. They feel powerful knowing what gets under your skin, what makes you falter, what corners you avoid. But when you grow, you make their information outdated. Growth invalidates their power. That's why they panic. They invested energy in knowing an older you, and now that person has vanished. They try to pull you back into the boxes they remember. But the walls collapse because you don't fit there anymore. That frustration reveals itself as bitterness. They don't just hate your growth. They resent the loss of control your growth forced on them. Psychology explains this through the concept of schema. People create mental maps of you based on repeated experiences. Once that map is set, they expect you to act the same way forever. But growth rips the map apart. When you act differently, their brains scramble. They accuse you of changing, of being arrogant, of being fake. Not because you are wrong, but because you no longer fit the version of you they had stored. You outgrew it, and now their schema is useless. This is why they lash out. It's not about what you've become. It's about their disorientation when the world they built around your predictability collapses. They wanted the version of you that tolerated their disrespect. They wanted the version of you that stayed quiet to keep peace. They wanted the version of you that needed their validation to feel whole. That version no longer exists. And instead of celebrating your evolution, they mourn the loss of their leverage. You didn't just grow. You cut the cords that made you manageable. That is why your growth feels like violence to them. It removed their ability to script your reactions. They are left clawing at memories, trying to resurrect a person you buried with purpose. This is why growth often isolates. When you outgrow old versions of yourself, you also outgrow the relationships that depended on those versions. They feel betrayed, but the betrayal is imaginary. You didn't betray them. You betrayed their expectation that you would stay small for their comfort. They call you distant, cold, or unrecognizable, because they cannot access the same weak points they once exploited. What they really mean is that they can no longer control you, and instead of asking how to evolve themselves, they cling to the past, resenting the future you walked into alone. Notice the power shift here. They once felt confident, certain they could predict you. Now they hesitate. They don't know which words will sting, which tactics will work, which threats will hold weight. You've turned their advantage into paralysis. Your growth stripped them of their strategy. That uncertainty is why they start speaking louder, spreading false stories, or accusing you of being different. It's their way of saying they are lost without the old blueprint. And you must understand this clearly. The louder they accuse you, the more proof you have that you outgrew every version they could once reach. Growth also brings an unspoken intimidation. Even if you never announce it, your energy shifts. People feel it in the way you walk, the way you respond, the way you no longer flinch at their attempts to provoke. They may not articulate it, but they know instinctively that they are no longer dealing with the same person. And that awareness unsettles them. They pray you return to the old patterns, because the new ones remind them of their own stagnation. Your growth doesn't just distance you from them, it exposes them for refusing to evolve. That mirror is painful, and instead of facing it, they attack you. This is the cycle of transformation. They despise you for doing what they were too afraid to attempt. They cling to old versions of you, because those versions made them comfortable. They could laugh at you, dismiss you, use you, and feel superior. But the new you strips that illusion. The new you demands they confront their own lack of progress. And most people would rather hate your growth than fix their own stagnation. That's why they label your evolution as arrogance. It's easier for them to demonize your rise than admit their own refusal to climb. You must never apologize for this. Outgrowing old versions of yourself is not betrayal. It is survival. It is how you refuse to be trapped in cycles that suffocated you. They may cry foul, they may guilt you, they may spread lies to paint you as the villain. Let them. That noise is confirmation that your growth is real. If they could still access you the way they used to, they wouldn't need to shout. Their shouting proves the doors are closed. And once closed, you must never unlock them again. Your growth was not for their comfort. It was for your liberation. Toxicity does not survive in open air. It suffocates when truth circulates, when fresh perspectives are allowed in, when people are free to question without punishment. But when the walls close in, when a group seals itself off from outside voices, the poison begins to thrive. A closed ecosystem creates the perfect breeding ground for manipulation, envy, and lies. They feed on each other's fears, recycle the same false stories, and convince themselves that the echo of their voices is reality. You've seen it. Workplaces where gossip spreads faster than ideas, families that cling to old wounds rather than growth, groups of friends that punish anyone who dares step outside their rules. Toxicity thrives there because there is no air, no exit, no challenge to their illusions. When people live inside a closed circle, the truth becomes whatever the loudest voice says it is. No one checks, no one questions, no one risks exile by speaking differently. This is how control spreads. They don't need proof to keep you trapped, they only need isolation. By cutting off external views, they trap everyone in a system where lies feel true and abuse feels normal. That is the danger of a closed ecosystem. People begin defending the very thing that's destroying them, because they've forgotten what freedom tastes like. And once you start believing that the cage is safety, the poison has already won. Psychology calls this groupthink, the phenomenon where individuals surrender their judgment to maintain harmony. But harmony in toxic spaces is not peace. It is silence demanded by fear. People suppress their instincts, bury their doubts, and nod at nonsense just to keep their place. And in doing so, they fertilize the soil for toxicity to grow unchecked. You've probably watched someone defend mistreatment simply because everyone else did. That's not loyalty. That's survival in a poisoned circle. Toxicity thrives not because it is strong, but because people fear being the first to disrupt it. That silence becomes the fuel for abuse. Closed ecosystems also distort identity. In these spaces, your value is measured not by who you are, but by how well you conform. If you speak differently, if you rise too high, if you challenge too loudly, you become the threat. And so, to avoid rejection, people shrink. They dull their edges, lower their standards, and betray their authenticity. This is exactly what toxicity needs: obedient participants who trade individuality for acceptance. The irony is that they think they are protecting themselves, but really, they are feeding the very system that is slowly hollowing them out.